From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Call on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me for another edition of Cole on Congress. Today we'll be talking with Jerry Taylor, a senior fellow at the renowned Washington think tank, the CATO Institute. Mr. Taylor is one of the country's most widely cited and influential voices on federal energy policy, although you might not want to take credit for that, frequently contributing to major national publications and network television. Today we'll discuss the controversial issue of climate change and specifically get into the recently passed cap and trade bill. Mr. Taylor, it's great to have you here. If I can call you Jerry, I'd much prefer that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thank you for being here. Let's start with the whole concept of climate change, because that's what the legislation, to some degree at least, is rooted in. And on that issue, there's a variety of opinion, everything from environmental disasters right around the corner to it's not happening at all. What's your view of climate change in terms of whether it exists, what's causing it, how serious is it?
Well, I'm not a scientist, but to the extent to which I've examined the issue, I think that climate change is probably happening. We do see trends of increasing global temperature, and it's likely that industrial emissions are a prime driver, not the only reason why temperatures are increasing, but a significant reason for why they are. However, I don't think that necessarily means disasters around the corner. We've seen a 1 degree Celsius warming over the last century, and we've also seen massive improvements in human well-being. We've seen life expectancy increase. We've seen crop yields improve. We've seen human health improve on all metrics. On all sorts of metrics. In other words, we know that a warming climate does not necessarily augur in a tremendous amount of ill for the human race. And given the pattern of warming we've seen, it's not entirely clear that there is an Armageddon on the horizon. I mean, most of the warming we've seen has been at night, not during the day. It's been in the northern hemisphere, not in the southern hemisphere, and it's been in the winter, not during the summer. And there are very good reasons for why that pattern of warming exists. It's discussed in the IPCC report, so it's not particularly controversial. But if that warming pattern continues, there's no book of revelations out of that sort of warming. It means a longer growing season, milder winters in the northern hemisphere, generally not too many downsides, and there are probably as many upsides as down.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the mechanism whereby now people want to deal with it here in Washington, D.C., which is cap and trade. Let me ask you, if I may, just to talk a little bit to our audience about what cap and trade is. There's an enormous amount of confusion about what the concept is, what it represents in terms of taxes and regulatory policy.
Well, it means that if you're an industrial corporation, if you're a manufacturer, if you're a power company, if you make cars, I mean, if you're a big emitter of greenhouse gases, you need permits to emit greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's where the cap part of cap and trade comes in. The federal government is going to put a limit on how much greenhouse gases can go into the atmosphere from U.S. industrial emission sources. So they're going to put a cap on, and they're going to issue credits, which can be traded by industrial actors, and that's the trade part of cap and trade. So the federal government says X amount of greenhouse gas emissions are allowable in any given year, and it will essentially issue currency that will represent, or permits that will represent, a certain amount of allowable permits. And if you're going to put greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, you've got to have one of these permits. And you can go ahead and trade them in the open market. You can buy them on Wall Street and this sort of thing. And that's what cap and trade means. It's essentially a fancy way of imposing a tax on energy consumption, because if you are going to put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, you have to get one of these permits, and these permits have a price, and that price will be passed on to the American consumer to some extent.
Why would it be better to do it that way than if you accepted that this was the appropriate mechanism to regulate carbon emissions? Why not just a straight carbon tax?
Well, you can write a cap and trade bill so that it's like a carbon tax, or you can write a carbon tax so it's like a cap and trade bill. The distinctions are somewhat artificial. The main difference between a cap and trade program and a carbon tax is certainty. Under a cap and trade program, you know how much emissions are going to go into the atmosphere in any given year. But you don't know what the cost of the permits are going to be, because the market's going to determine that. Under a carbon tax, you know what it's going to cost to put a ton of, say, greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, but you don't know how much is going to go into that atmosphere, right? As long as you pay the tax, you can put the stuff into the atmosphere. And so the question is, where would you rather have certainty, on the cost side of the program or on the emissions side of the program? And people of differing points of view differ on where they want the certainty. Some people argue that a carbon tax would be more straightforward, be harder to mess around with, and to game and rig to your benefit, to the detriment of other competitors. I'm not so sure that's the case, though. I mean, if you look at the U.S. tax code, there are all kinds of exceptions and loopholes and all kinds of mischief that goes on there. So the idea that it's harder to do mischief through the tax code than it is through a cap-and-trade program, I'm not entirely sure is true.
Well, you have any concern about the fact that in the trading of these credits, you wouldn't have to really be involved in the production or even the consumption of energy? I mean, it's just going to be a commodity that you can move forth, manipulate, subject to a lot of volatility from the consumer standpoint.
That's absolutely true. Europe has a cap-and-trade program, has had and it's operated for several years. So we can look at that program and get some sense of what we might see here. And that cap-and-trade program has led to very volatile emissions prices and thus very volatile consumer prices. Some days the permits are very expensive, and other parts of the year the permits are dirt cheap. And the reason for that is that it's a rather illiquid market, which is a fancy economic term for a market in which there are not as many buyers and sellers of permits as one might ideally want. The fewer people who are in this market and the fewer dollars that are in this market, the more subject that market is to manipulation. In other words, you want a lot of people with a lot of money in this market because that reduces the chances that the market can be manipulated or gamed somehow. But the fewer people are in that market with the fewer dollars, the more it can be gamed. And we've seen allegations of that in Europe, and I suspect we would see that in the United States as well, because it's hard to imagine this market being as liquid as we might like. So the first question you asked is, what about people who aren't in the energy business? Do we want them in this market? Well, we do. The more people and the more money out there, the less this market is subject to being rigged against some parties or some consumers. And it also allows people to exercise their preferences. So if Greenpeace or Sierra Club or somebody likes that really wants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they're willing to pay the price. They can go to the market, buy a lot of permits, and then just burn them in a backyard somewhere. They've done their job in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I personally don't have any problem with that. I mean, if people want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they should have a right to go into the market and do that. We allow people to exercise their preferences in other markets. Why not in this market if they're willing to outbid other parties who might otherwise want to use those credits? So I don't worry too much about that.
Well, of course, it's a pretty artificial market. It's a market that the government's created. It wouldn't exist otherwise. So
no, that's absolutely true.
It's in that sense, it raises pretty serious questions. Are we creating a market that really has no purpose other than flow of money to the government, market manipulation? Presumably you affect greenhouse gases, but how much? How much, particularly if you're operating in a national context, which this bill does, with a problem that in some ways is international in scope?
Well, maybe not very much at all, but the first observation you made about the artificial nature of this market is dead on. In fact, the best analogy to this market that we've seen in the United States is, ironically enough, the California electricity market. And there's an artificial market established by regulators, essentially, where you had a variation of cap and trade in a sense. You had a market that the government oversaw on the wholesale side of the business. People, when they set up the market, said, look, this is not a liquid enough market. There's not enough competitors. It can be rigged. You've got very odd rules of the game here. They're going to have very unforeseen consequences. People went ahead anyway, and you saw what happened. A lot of market manipulation, a lot of problems for consumers. So that's certainly an issue. As far as how much this program is really going to accomplish, that's very unclear. Again, Europe has had a cap-and-trade program under the Kyoto Protocol since 2001, and it's interesting to note that emissions in Europe during the cap-and-trade program have been greater than emissions in the United States. In other words, the rate of emissions in Europe has been increasing, and it hasn't been increasing as much as it has in the United States. Even though we don't have a cap-and-trade program, they do. The reason why it hasn't worked too well in Europe is there's a lot of loopholes and exceptions and all kinds of things that provide the illusion of emissions reductions that don't really necessarily follow. So we don't know that the cap-and-trade program would work very well. It certainly hasn't reduced emissions in Europe. How much it might reduce temperature and greenhouse gas emissions, even if it worked perfectly, not very much. If you run the emissions reductions in the Waxman-Markey bill that your Congress just passed through the computer models, that are used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, you find that by the year 2050, temperatures will be 1/10 of 1 degree Fahrenheit cooler than where they otherwise would have been absent this bill. And by the year 2100, temperatures will be about 2/10 of a degree Fahrenheit cooler than they otherwise would have been had this bill never been adopted. So in and of itself, even if the bill works perfectly as advertised, it's going to have an infinitesimal impact on the climate.
What do you think the consequences will be? We've got other major powers that are industrializing pretty rapidly, in China and India, that so far have signaled, we're not going to be part of this arrangement. We're not going to have an artificial cap. What's the impact of people of that size and that growth rate being outside the market likely to have on businesses that are trying to operate inside a market like that?
Well, obviously, if companies in China and India are not part of a cap-and-trade program, they don't have to pay this carbon tax. They don't have to pay anybody to emit greenhouse gases. They're going to have a competitive advantage over companies that are operating in the United States or in the European Union who have to pay these taxes or pay the price for these permits. Of course, if you're not engaged in international trade, it probably doesn't matter to you one way or the other. But if you're in the car business, if you're in the steel business, if you're in the iron business, or consumer electronics, or all sorts of different industries, you'll find that the Chinese and Indian competitors you might face are going to have, in many sectors, a significant market advantage. That's one of the reasons why the bill that emerged out of the Congress recently had a provision which would impose tariffs on imports from these countries which don't have any greenhouse gas emissions protection program. I'm not too sympathetic with that. I'm not sure we really want to start a trade war with these countries. I think their imports are a good, not a bad thing for U.S. consumers. And I think they have a fairly decent case. Per capita energy consumption in India is 15 times lower than what it is in the United States, 7 times lower in China. These are countries which in aggregate are big economic actors, of course, if you measure by GDP. But if you measure these countries by how much, what per capita GDP is, what human well-being is in these countries, these are very, very poor countries. They have a lot of growth on the horizon. That's the reason that India and China are not wild about signing up with the Kyoto Protocol or with something like a Waxman-Markey bill. They value economic growth a lot more than they value greenhouse gas emissions controls, and for reasons that would be very apparent to anybody who spent any time in those countries.
Now, another argument that's commonly cited in terms of advancing cap and trade is it'll begin the process of weaning us away from foreign oil in particular. We'll become more energy independent. We'll pursue technologies that will not only make us independent, but will provide an engine of economic growth inside this country. What's your opinion of those type of arguments?
I don't think they follow. It certainly will make fossil fuels more expensive. That's what a cap-and-trade program is designed to do, make consumers pay for the greenhouse gases they're putting into the atmosphere. Will they be forced to pay enough so that renewable energy is cost competitive? Probably not. If the difference in cost between, say, coal and gas-fired electricity and electricity fired by wind or solar power is huge, and the increased costs associated with fossil fuel consumption are not going to be great enough to offset that difference in price. Same thing in the auto sector. We import crude oil to run our cars, and the only thing that we have to compete with crude oil right now is ethanol. And it turns out that if you do an analysis, the greenhouse gas emissions from ethanol are about the same as they are from oil. Some people think they're even greater than they are for oil. And so there's no advantage for ethanol consumers vis-a-vis gasoline consumers if you do the calculations right. So you can raise fossil fuel prices all you want through a greenhouse gas emissions program, but it's going to increase ethanol prices just as much because they have to pay those credits too, at least if the program is designed honestly. So I don't think it has those advantages. Basically, it just makes energy more expensive. But think about, and if you want an analogy, look at Europe. Europe has very, very stiff gasoline taxes for historical reasons, not anything to do with climate change. Gasoline in Europe on U.S. terms runs $7, $8 a gallon. Question, even when gasoline is $7 or $8 a gallon, do they rely on alternative fuels to get around? Answer, no. Even at $7 and $8 a gallon, it's cheaper to use gasoline than to use ethanol made from beets, or to use electric cars, or propane cars, or compressed natural gas cars, or fusion-powered fuel cells, or anything like that. So no, I don't think that any of those wonderful things that people want to see, this migration from oil, or foreign oil in particular, follows necessarily from these cap-and-trade bills.
One of the power sources we've not heard very much about in the course of this debate, which certainly the French and Europeans use, we use pretty effectively here in this country when we can permit it, is nuclear power. Why hasn't that been a bigger part of the debate? If you're really worried about carbon emissions, here's something, or greenhouse gases. Here's a source of power that doesn't emit greenhouse gases. Yet we don't hear a lot of that. We don't see anything in this bill that really encourages or facilitates the construction of new nuclear power facilities in our country.
Well, to the extent to which this bill would make fossil fuel more expensive, that indirectly helps nuclear power because, well, it's not putting out greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It doesn't have to go into the market to find these permits. That's what coal-fired power plants have to do. People who run gas-fired power plants, they have to do that. Guys who run nuclear power plants don't have to do that. So they are advantaged any time you've got a cap-and-trade program in there. Are they advantaged beyond that? Not very much, at least if you ask their lobbyists. And I'm fine with that. I don't think the federal government ought to be picking or choosing winners or losers in energy markets. They ought to set the rules of the road and then step back. If nuclear power is economically competitive in a carbon-constrained world, then people will build those plants. If it's not, then they won't. It may turn out that it's cheaper to live with these permits and just to pay the price than it is to build a nuclear power plant, because even with the increased cost of fossil fuels, it's still cheaper to get your electricity from coal than, say, nuclear. If that's the way it is under a Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade world, I'm fine with that. If, on the other hand, nuclear power is cost competitive, then people will build those plants. I'm willing to leave those decisions to the market. I don't think the federal government ought to be rigging the market.
Yeah, well, of course, cap-and-trade does rig the market. If you were free to design an energy system in this country, what would be your preferred model?
Suicide. Because I don't think we ought to be designing energy systems or energy markets for this economy. This isn't Soviet Russia where you have 5 or 10-year plans. I mean, so often in Washington, people talk as if they believe in free markets, but when it comes to energy, they act as if we can't possibly leave these decisions to the market. Somebody in Congress has to decide what our energy future is going to look like. And, of course, Republicans have their ideas and Democrats have their ideas, and they both squabble about how to rig the market and how to design that energy market. I think that's just fundamentally wrong. I think you should leave these decisions to the marketplace. The energy is no different than any other commodity. And the decision about what energy is produced and where it's produced from ought to be left to investors and businessmen, not congressmen or senators. And how much of it is consumed, under what terms and conditions that energy is consumed, ought to be left to consumers and not to regulators or bureaucrats. There's really no good reason for why free markets work everywhere except in energy markets. They work perfectly well in energy markets as long as we get the rules of the road correct. If you are one of those people who believes that global warming is a significant problem and that we have to address, then the right answer is to tax greenhouse gas emissions and leave it at that. Step back and let the market sort out how to live under that world. If you don't believe that, and I'm not a person who does, I believe that we should leave these emissions alone, then you should just walk away and leave and send these issues back to the market. That would be, in my opinion, the right way to go.
Of the things that are in the bill, and I think there's probably a lot of things in the bill that none of us know because, frankly, we were cobbling the bill together up to 3 o'clock in the morning the day we voted on it, sadly. What are the things that concern you the most?
Well, there are a lot of problems with the bill. What offended me the most as a policy analyst is the extent to which the bill was meant to rig markets to benefit well-connected lobbyists. So, for instance, if you owned a coal-fired power plant, under this bill, you don't have to go out and get as many permits as a competitor who wanted to build a coal-fired power plant tomorrow. They had very different standards. The federal government would regulate his emissions far more aggressively than he's going to regulate the emissions of an existing coal-fired power plant. Well, this is a dream for owners of coal-fired power plants at present because it cartelizes the industry, right? It imposes a massive tax on future competitors and gives you an artificial advantage in the marketplace. That was an advantage that was baked into the bill for a very good reason. They were trolling around for votes. The same thing happened in the oil refining sector. If you were a small refiner, you got regulatory advantages that were extremely valuable in this bill. If you were a large refiner, now the bill didn't care about you. But what happened? When they provided these advantages for small refiners, all of a sudden the National Petroleum Refiners Association found that its members broke. And a lot of small refiners started embracing the bill because they got artificial advantages because of it. I mean, this happens over and over and over again in this legislation. So even if you were a Greenpeace member or a Sierra Club member and you wanted to see a cap-and-trade bill on the table, you ended up looking at this 1,400-page monstrosity, finding there were loopholes and exceptions and codicils and giveaways everywhere in this legislation that were subverting your own ends. And, you know, from somebody who believes in free markets, we don't believe in rigging the market any further than we have to. And this bill just goes on a rampage, picking winners and looters and artificially enriching some and impoverishing others.
Well, of course, even beyond the markets. I mean, it's a national building code. It's all sorts of standards, and the amount of power that it gives to the federal government to interfere in almost every area of life, not just because energy touches everything, is staggering in terms of what could happen. And eventually, you know, it can become an enormous revenue source for the federal government.
Well, that's it. It's an open-ended tax. If you look at the studies that have been done about the costs of Waxman marking, there have been about a half dozen. On the low side, you find studies that think that the bill will only cost your average household maybe $100 or $200 a year. That's on the low side. On the high side, there are some studies which suggest that the bill might actually cost the average American household somewhere around $4,000 a year. What the truth is in between those hugely different estimates, $100 a year, $4,000 a year for your average household, it's unclear. We don't know what the costs of reducing greenhouse gas emissions are going to be 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now. It's a lot of speculation. But the bill provides no guarantee that it will only be X and no more than X. Oh, it guarantees that what the price floor will be for greenhouse gas emissions. It guarantees that no matter what, you'll have to pay at least $10 a ton to buy a credit to emit greenhouse gases. But there's no ceiling on how much it could cost. So if something were to happen, say if the market were manipulated California style, like the electricity market about 9 years ago, well, there's no end to the prices consumers might have to pay. There's no ceiling. There's no opportunity. There's a very limited opportunity for the federal government to do anything about market manipulation or about economic events, which may jack the price of this bill far beyond anything people look at. And that's another worrisome part of the bill. You don't like open-ended taxes, especially when they could be, according to an MIT study, for instance, at nearly $4,000 a household. That's pretty scary stuff.
Well, and to a point you made earlier, and it's absolutely true, this distorts the, quote, political market, too, because I can assure you, once something like this is put in, lobbyists will, this is not a once and forever deal for a lobbyist. They'll be back again and again and again around the edges to try and manipulate the system to somehow advantage a client. And politicians being who and what they are, they make decisions politically. They don't make them economically. They tend to decide, okay, what makes good politics for me in my area on this issue, and I guess that's where I'll be. So it really adds a whole distorting mechanism, and it adds it really now going forward forever, because as long as you've got it, you're going to have political manipulation involved in it.
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of people and a lot of companies that get rich by finding writing very small loopholes into bills like this, which makes it very difficult for industries to stay united one way or the other, because people are very adept at handing out those little loopholes and exceptions. And then once they're in place, they're very hard to get rid of. It's a Herculean task to close these things off, because each of us as consumers might only be disadvantaged by about a penny or two a year because of the higher taxes or the lost efficiency associated with a bad regulatory provision like that. But one small party of individuals, maybe one corporation or one group of corporations or one sector, say the ethanol sector, might be enriched by tens of billions of dollars. They have every incentive to fight tooth and nail to keep this. So you might say, well, okay, so I'm out a penny or two a year and they're enriched by $10 billion a year. It's not the end of the world, but you multiply that by, say, 100 or 1,000-fold, because there's all kinds of deals like that in bills, and before you know it, the bill comes far more expensive than it ever needed to be, even if you believe in the ultimate end of the bill, which is reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it produces a lot of inefficiency in the market. For instance, the ethanol industry wouldn't even exist for the most part.
Let's talk a little bit about the ethanol. Absolutely right, and the pernicious impact beyond energy prices in terms of food prices, in terms of, I represent in my district a lot of people that raise cattle. It matters a lot to them that the corn stock is moving into ethanol instead of on the market. They have serious questions about, or you have riots in Mexico all of a sudden because the price of cornmeal for tortillas is high. All for an industry, frankly, that is pretty questionable in terms of how much it adds to either our energy independence or what kind of real difference it makes in terms of carbon emissions.
Well, if all the corn that was grown in the United States last year were dedicated to ethanol production, every bit of it, let's assume we just made no corn flakes, did nothing else with the corn except turn it into ethanol, we would reduce oil imports by about 3%. So it wouldn't do that much for energy independence, even if we were to go hog wild on ethanol. As far as protecting us from other supply disruptions, well, weather is also a supply disruption. I mean, even small changes in crop yields or consumption patterns can have huge price impacts, as we saw 2 years ago, or we saw in the summer of 2008, when we saw food riots and elsewhere over even just small increases in product demand. If you look at this market, I mean, I have no problem with ethanol per se. If it can compete with gasoline, great. I'd be the first one to applaud it. But even during the highest price period we saw in 2009, when gasoline was selling at around $4 a gallon, ethanol on wholesale markets, before all the subsidies kicked in, were selling at least $1 a gallon more than gasoline, even then, even during the summer of 2009. Now, consumers never see that because there are a lot of subsidies in play. You never see wholesale prices for ethanol. What you see is gasoline, which is, nine parts gasoline to 1 part ethanol. So the true costs of ethanol are hidden from consumers. But if you look at the wholesale markets, it's stunning that even as gasoline prices go up, so do ethanol prices. And in fact, virtually no circumstances in modern history has ethanol ever been cost effective with gasoline, ever.
What about the other alternatives we hear so much about these days? Wind power, we have a lot of that coming online in Oklahoma. Solar power, a lot of discussion about that. How effective are they really in terms of competition with carbon-based energy right now?
Without the government, there wouldn't be a windmill facility in the United States in any commercial sense. The problem with wind is that it's much more expensive than coal-fired or gas-fired electricity, 2 or 3 times more expensive, depending upon whose studies you look at. But it's unclear, since these are, a lot of these are proprietary numbers. So actually, if you want to answer the question, how expensive is wind vis-a-vis, say, coal, it's harder to get the answer than you think. But it is more expensive, that much we know. And in fact, the industry itself will tell you that, because when they come and lobby for the tax credits, they say without these generous federal tax credits, we go away. We would completely disappear. So they're the first ones to tell you that without the federal government, they couldn't compete. So they are more expensive. But beyond just the fact they're more expensive, wind-fired electricity is for the most part something that is produced in the winter, not during the summer. Much more electricity comes during the winter, not than in the summer. And it's primarily at night, not during the day when it's necessary, and especially not during hot summer days when you've got high-pressure systems where you get the real scorching temperatures, where electricity demand is the greatest. That's when wind's producing the least. So in other words, wind is not only pricey, but it's giving you electricity when you don't need it. You don't need so much at night. You don't need so much in winter. You don't need so much when the low-pressure systems are on, where the market really needs the electricity, where investors really want to build power plants so they can meet that hot summer day demand when demand peaks. And wind can't do anything there. Now, solar can do something there, but solar is even more expensive than wind. And again, without the government, solar can't very well compete. And unfortunately, we don't live anywhere near the deserts where most of the solar power could be gained. And the transmission costs are very great. Now, if and when these problems are overcome, and maybe they will be overcome 5, 10, 20 years from now, that'd be a wonderful thing. There's all sorts of scientific breakthroughs you could imagine that would make wind and solar economically competitive. When that day comes, that would be great. And I'd be the first again to applaud it. But the federal government can't hasten that day by handing out corporate welfare checks to entities, which, by the way, are as often as not major oil companies as they are a Bob and Susie Cream Cheese Wind Power Company. Some of the biggest billionaires in the world are the guys who've taken over this industry, like T. Boone Pickens, who doesn't need our help. If they can compete without the taxpayer underwriting their investments, that's great. But at the moment, they can't.
Well, Jerry, we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Cole on Congress. Until the next time, this is Congressman Tom Cole from our nation's capital. Thank you very much. And Jerry, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.